A quorum being present, the subcommittee will come to order. I'd now like to recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to begin by extending a warm welcome to the returning members on the subcommittee. Over the years, this subcommittee has been fortunate to operate in a bipartisan fashion, and I look forward to continuing the work that we've done and working hand in hand with my good friend, the gentleman from New Jersey, our ranking member, Albio Ceres. And all the members of the subcommittee as the new Trump administration begins to lay out their policy priorities for the Western Hemisphere. I look forward to seeing what those priorities are. I'd now like to introduce the new members. They're not here, but I'm going to go ahead and read their names, and hopefully they'll trickle in after votes, is the way it goes sometimes. We've got Mr. Mo Brooks from Alabama, and Mr. Francis Rooney of Florida, Ms. Norma Torres of California, and Mr. Adriano Espaillat of New York. They each have their own unique background and experiences, and we look forward to them being strong contributors to our work during this 115th Congress. Today's hearing should provide subcommittee members with a comprehensive look at the lay of the land in the Western Hemisphere, give us some food for thought as the new Trump administration begins to reveal their priorities for 2017. I'm particularly interested in what our witnesses think that policy priorities should be in Cuba and Venezuela, and in places that continue to receive large amounts of U.S. taxpayer funding, like Colombia, Haiti, and the Northern Triangle in Central America. Clearly, the administration will need to work on bilateral relationship with Mexico, but the United States is certainly right to seek to enforce our borders and protect our precious sovereignty. I thank today's distinguished panel of witnesses for being here and sharing their thoughts and insights with us. Many of them have testified before our committee before, and I welcome them back. In my opinion, the prior administration did little to advance U.S. interests in this hemisphere, and in fact did harm to traditional U.S. policies of standing up for human rights, the rule of law under repressive regimes that currently plague countries like Cuba and Venezuela. In Cuba, the Obama administration gave the Castros pretty much everything they wanted without asking Congress to remove the embargo as required by U.S. law. Furthermore, the Obama administration didn't even insist upon the most basic human rights protections, as political dissidents were rounded up, beaten, and jailed in record numbers. And in their Cuba policy shift, the all-important issue of resolving the thousands of property rights claims were barely even mentioned. The pain and suffering that the Chavez-Maduro regime inflicted upon Venezuela has been well documented, and our hearts go out to the Venezuelan people who deserve so much more than hyperinflation, rolling blackouts, widespread shortages of medicine, and literally scrounging for food every day just to survive. Recent reports of canines and flamingos and other animals being slaughtered for food is disheartening, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the folks in Venezuela. I was encouraged by early signs from the new administration last week, including the decision to slap sanctions on the new Venezuelan vice president for his participation in drug trafficking, and President Trump's taking of an impromptu meeting with Lilian Lopez, the wife of wrongfully jailed opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez. We also had the opportunity to meet with her as well, and Leopoldo Lopez remains in our thoughts and prayers. Under my chairmanship, this subcommittee has traveled extensively in the region, and I intend to continue to do my part in this session of Congress to advance our interest in the hemisphere. It's been said that our region does not get the attention that it deserves. In fact, when Secretary Kerry made his famous speech at the OAS in November 2013 that the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over, the administration admitted as much. But I would maintain that because of our region being largely peaceful, the lack of major wars for several years, a healthy flow of trade and commerce, and an abundance of common heritage and religious beliefs, these are things to be celebrated and built upon rather than overlooked. Of course, that is not to say that we don't have much work to do. The important task of finishing Plan Colombia by making Peace Colombia work going forward will surely present many challenges to U.S. and Colombian policymakers, but is work in which both our countries have invested much blood and treasure so as to successfully turn that country around. As a result, they remain our best ally in the hemisphere. In Haiti, it has now been more than 7 years since the devastating earthquake that resulted in so much damage and loss of life. Much progress has been made thanks to the generosity of U.S. taxpayers and many other international donors, but there's still much work to be done there. It certainly didn't help that they were hit by Hurricane Matthew last fall and experienced another uptick in cases of cholera. Like many regional observers, nearly 14 months after the elections began, I was hopeful when Haiti finally democratically elected a new president and a Congress. We at least now have a government partner to work with going forward, and I plan to do my part in keeping a healthy dialogue open when I meet with the new president sometime later this year. Obviously, this is all not to say the Hemisphere doesn't still suffer from the seemingly intractable problems of drug trafficking, transnational gangs and criminal organizations, corruption, poverty, and lack of opportunity for many. We have been experiencing the results of these problems firsthand with the continual wave of illegal immigration, especially unaccompanied minors from the Northern Triangle, Central America, coming to our southern border every day. I support the Trump administration and stand with those who believe we must enforce our borders and protect our sovereignty. As Ronald Reagan said, if we do not, we are not a country at all. We are a kind and generous nation, but we cannot become the orphanage to the world. When I assumed the chairmanship of this subcommittee, I pointed out that in our first hearing, that I have three simple priorities, and I'll restate those for this Congress. Create jobs for the American people, promote U.S. energy security and U.S. exports, and return to the wisdom of our founding fathers. That's an acronym, jobs, energy, founding fathers. That's spelled Jeff, and I think Jeff's a winning message. It is through that prism that I'll continue to view the issues and priorities that we will focus on going forward. The Western Hemisphere presents abundant opportunities for success in all of these areas for the United States as well as our allies here in the Hemisphere. With that, I will turn to the ranking member, Mr. Sirius, for his opening statement, and I will restate again that I have enjoyed our work together, and I look forward to working with you again, and so I'll yield with you.
I just want to start by saying that you and I had nothing to do with Mr. Meeks going down below.
It was by consensus.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to our first hearing of the 115th Congress and give a special welcome to the new members of our subcommittee. I look forward to working with all of you in the new Congress. I am grateful to be back as ranking member of the subcommittee once again and serving alongside our chairman and my friend from South Carolina, Jeff Duncan. Many countries in the Western Hemisphere are a crossroad. Throughout the region, the anti-corruption wave has taken hold, and we have seen indictments, arrests, and resignation as a result. While these revelations have caused a stir in the region, they have also created the opportunities to bring real and lasting change to these institutions, long in need of reform. In the Northern Triangle, efforts are underway to strengthen the rule of law and address human rights concerns. Though Brazil officials are facing accusations of bribery, Brazilian people are insisting their government uses democratic institutions to hold them accountable. Partners like Argentina are taking steps to reform their economies and play a larger role addressing regional challenges. That is why I am proud to sponsor HRES 54, reaffirming our strong relation with the Argentine people and commending the government of President Macri for his economic reform and commitment to holding the perpetrators of the 1994 AMIA bombing accountable. Additionally, our friends in Colombia signed a peace agreement with the FARC, taking the first steps in ending a 52-year-long war that has claimed the lives of over 200,000 people. We must remember that this agreement is just the beginning of the peace, not the end result. It is now more important than ever to continue our bipartisan backing of Colombia as they work to implement the peace deal, fight back against criminal groups looking to take over the FARC's territory, and deter further coca cultivation. Despite these opportunities for growth, challenges still abound. The repression of the Cuban people is only escalating, with innocent women continuing to regularly be beaten in the streets while peacefully marching. The Venezuelan people are unfortunately continuing to languish at the hands of Maduro, who continues to stifle democracy and violently fight back against pro-democracy advocates. My experience with the Western Hemisphere has taught me that any approach to Latin America needs to be a regional one. Piecemeal approaches will not tackle the region's most pressing challenges, such as strengthening the rule of law, respect for human rights, increasing transparency, and combating drug trafficking. That is why I am concerned that the rhetoric that is already coming out of the Trump administration with regards to our allies like Mexico, who has been a strong partner of the U.S. under both Republican and Democratic administrations. I hope that President Trump soon realizes how much these relationships have enhanced the security and prosperity of the United States, and the only way to make the region stronger is by working together. I thank the witnesses for their testimony and look forward to discussing how we can improve relations in the coming year. Thank you.
Okay, this being our first subcommittee meeting, I'm going to kind of step out of the norm and recognize the former chairwoman of the subcommittee, of the full committee, and the subcommittee chairman of Middle East and North Africa, Ms. Ross Layton, for a brief opening statement.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member for this timely hearing. I'll be traveling to the region with the ranking member series. We're going to Honduras and Guatemala this weekend, and we've seen those countries make significant progress in fighting corruption, but the attorney generals of these countries need our support. They face tremendous propaganda campaigns to undermine the progress they've been making. In Nicaragua, we see the Ortega regime immersed in corruption, denying human rights to its people, and undermining our interest in the region by placating to the Russians. So much work needs to be done. In Venezuela, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, thank goodness we've got new sanctions against these human rights violators. We've seen the dialogue in Venezuela is not working, and the U.S. position must be that Josh Holt and all the political prisoners, including Leopoldo Lopez and Antonio Ledesma, must be released immediately and unconditionally. And in my native homeland of Cuba, we need to prioritize our focus to the communist island and be on the side of human rights, on the side of the return of fugitives like Joanne Chesimard, on the side of U.S. citizens whose properties were confiscated. There's so much going on, but we're hopeful signals too. We've got a new election cycle in Ecuador, Mr. Chairman, in April. That's going to hopefully bring back election democratic norms to that country. And in Haiti, lastly, after years of stalling, elections finally occurred, and we have a new president. So good things can happen. Thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member.
I thank the lady, and I want to go now to Mr. Meeks, who is probably the senior member on the subcommittee, for a brief opening statement. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this very important hearing on issues and opportunities in the Western Hemisphere. Our relationship with our neighbors, partners, and friends must be a high priority for the United States. I am hopeful, that the cuts that we're seeing to the State Department, which the President is proposing, does not jeopardize some of the things that we do. I'm very concerned about that, and maybe some of the other statements that he has made, particularly in regards to Mexico, where we have spent decades investing in relationship that works collaboratively on all fronts. And the question is now whether or not all of that is in jeopardy following inflammatory and audacious statements regarding Mexican migrants and orders to increase deportations that would tear families apart and efforts to build a border wall at Mexico's expense. Mexico is a big, important people for us, and there's no question that NAFTA should be updated to meet the needs and changes of the 21st century. However, it has enabled a strong trade relationship between our countries, and the subject of withdrawal by any of the three countries should not be used and taken lightly or used as a political tool. It is unfortunate, as I've heard both you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking members say, that the political situation in Venezuela has become detrimental to the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan people are deserving of safety, security, and prosperity, and their well-being must take center change. Positive changes across the hemisphere are welcome, including in the Caribbean, where we are encouraged by Haiti's commitment to peaceful transfer of power to a new president. The Haitian people have endured countless natural and man-made disasters, and it is their resilience that will restore and rejuvenate a democratic Haiti. Changes to the hemisphere are constant. But I also want to just say I'm pleased that we've enacted last year the U.S. Caribbean Strategic Engagement Act, which I think helps us stronger engagement with the Caribbean. It's critical to our national security. And also, I could not stop without talking about, and I think I've heard everyone's mentioned this, the ratified peace agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC, which showcased to the world that Colombia's perseverance looks like and serves as a model to others that getting to the table and talking through legitimate concerns and next steps is possible for our support for Peace Colombia, and that should be as strong as it was for Plan Colombia. And you know I'm a big trade guy, but I gotta end. I want to conclude by highlighting an issue that is near and dear to me: the social inclusion of persons of African descent and indigenous and marginalized communities is crucial to the advancement of our hemisphere. I would like to spotlight Brazil and Colombia as leaders in their respective efforts to dissolve barriers of race discrimination. Our joint action plans with Brazil and Colombia to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination and promote equality highlights our mutual commitment to the issues. I fear that if we fail to acknowledge the necessity of social inclusion across the hemisphere, it will be to the detriment of all of us in the hemisphere, including the United States. As Dr. King would said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So the political, economic, social, and environmental advancement of our hemisphere requires earnest and genuine social inclusion to combat systemic discrimination and injustice. And if any government in the hemisphere, including the United States, fails to address this, it will do so at its own peril. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Meeks. I'm going to go ahead and recognize the witnesses. The rest of the committee members, if you would like to make a brief opening statement during the question period, I'll allow a little leniency on our time and not adhere to the strict 5 minutes, but keep those statements brief when we get into the question time. Just want to try to make it fair with this being our first committee, but I would like to go ahead and start hearing from the witnesses in the time allotted. So we'll now proceed with that. Each witness will be given 5 minutes to present testimony. There's no lighting system in here, so I'll give a brief indication when your time's getting close, so if you can wrap it up at that point. Members have been given the bios of all the witnesses, and that's how we'll run this committee. We will not introduce each witness by their bio, long length of introduction. I'll just recognize them to go ahead with their testimony. You can read about them beforehand. We should provide that beforehand. So, Ms. Sally Yearwood, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and welcome back.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Series, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The countries of the Caribbean and Central America are America's third border, and while they do not always figure front and center in discussions on hemispheric policy, they include 22 of the hemisphere's 35 independent nations and are therefore of significant strategic importance. With limited exceptions, the countries of the region have strong and long-standing relationships with the US and share common values, intertwined histories, and often common challenges. The important thing about challenges, however, is that solutions and opportunities for all partners are found in collaboration, clear priorities, and shared commitment. At the end of 2016, the bipartisan bill, the United States Caribbean Strategic Engagement Act of 2016, was passed into law. I would like to go on the record thanking Congressman Engel and Congresswoman Ross-Lehtinen for their co-sponsorship of the bill and ongoing support to the region. Its passage has immediately afforded an opportunity for Caribbean stakeholders to dialogue with counterparts in the United States on areas of mutual importance. Where Central America figures in the United States foreign policy and what this means for tackling such areas as crime and corruption in a volatile environment is particularly important, and ongoing commitment and partnership is necessary. There is a lot at stake, particularly for the countries of the Northern Triangle, where uncertainty could have repercussions across the social, political, and economic fronts, including the vibrant trade relationship. The US has consistently had a surplus with both subregions for the trade of goods. While the balance of trade with the hemisphere overall shows the US ran a deficit of $36.9 billion in 2014, the balance of trade with CBI countries recorded a surplus of $3.6 billion that year, and in 2015, the US had a trade surplus of $5 billion with DR-CAFTA countries. This trade supports hundreds of thousands of jobs here and has a correlated effect of creating and supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs in the region. There are a number of issues today that have broad implications for growth in the region. The weight of each factor varies by country, but I will point to some areas that have general resonance and are often related. 1. Crime is one of the most pervasive issues that governments and societies are confronting. The tentacles of drugs, gangs, and violence bleed into politics and the economies in ways that many of the countries are unable to address in isolation. Related to the ability to manage crime in many of the countries is the weak nature of the judicial process. The court systems are often bogged down, and people who are arrested are held without trial for extended periods of time, not to mention those who are in and out of the system after payoffs. Collaboration on security programs in the region can have a positive impact on the cost of managing border security in the United States. As an example, customs and immigration pre-clearance facilities are an instrument for building mutually beneficial partnerships for protecting borders. 2, corruption has different implications depending on the type and scale of the problem, but it is important to note that there are significant efforts being undertaken throughout the region to combat it and to increase transparency and accountability. These are yielding important results, and ongoing support from international partners, including the United States, will serve to strengthen political will and will have lasting results. 3, reforms that can drive a more productive policy environment for trade and investment are necessary. Indeed, institutional inertia in both the Caribbean and Central America has been a barrier to more dynamic business communities. A strong business climate with clear rules and with rule of law has implications for job creation and economic growth, and is an area that will impact competitiveness and productivity for the better. 4, there are strong legal migrant communities from Central America and the Caribbean throughout the United States, and as US policy evolves, there will be concerns about the possible effects on the region. One would be about the general economic impact, which could be triggered by a drop in remittances. And second is the absorptive capacity if there is a wave of returning migrants and/or deportees. This could put extreme socioeconomic pressure on nations unless national or international resources are directed towards managing this influx. 5, the correspondent banking crisis in the Caribbean is considered a threat to stability. Small markets and high costs of compliance with global regulations have led to the de-risking phenomenon, which is an outflow of foreign banks that manage cross-border transactions. The US, together with other bilateral partners and multilateral institutions, is working with the region to address compliance issues and the related unintended consequences. This cooperation must continue as a matter of national and regional security. 6, the entire region is vulnerable to natural disasters, and the cost of a disaster can reach up to 30% of GDP. Linked to this vulnerability is the impact of rising sea levels that are threatening the coastlines. Resilient infrastructure development is a key to economically and sound and secure region. 7, it is difficult to capture the importance of regional energy security in a paragraph. Venezuela's relationship with many in the region and the influence of PetroCaribe is its own book. Some highlights on progress in the region include the important work on the Central American electrical interconnection system, Guyana being on the brink of becoming a regional and global energy leader, and the deployment of technology for transportation and delivery of natural gas, which is making this fuel a more accessible and cost-efficient option for small islands. The US and other partners have been working with the region with a focus on sustainable energy development. This has had positive results for economies where the high cost of energy can negatively impact economic activity. And finally, a few words on Haiti, where the new president was recently inaugurated. Haiti's social and economic development will require substantial public and private sector investment. Haiti's stability needs to be secured, and it will take well-planned domestic strategies coupled with targeted, thoughtful international involvement to achieve this. In conclusion, fragile states are unreliable neighbors, so it is valuable to underscore the importance of a strong collaborative relationship with the countries of our third border. This subcommittee has been very mindful of this fact, and I appreciate the attention that is given to the smaller nations of the Hemisphere and to the issues impacting the systemic challenges to their economic growth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to be with you.
Chairwood, I now will recognize Joseph Humeyer for 5 minutes.
Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Sears, distinguished members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. Thank you once again for inviting me to testify before you today, and thank you for your leadership on a region that's near and dear to my heart and one I spent a lot of time through my work. We're in an important period of transition, both in the world, but more particularly in the Western Hemisphere. The rise of pro-U.S. governments in Argentina, Peru, Brazil, Guatemala, and potentially other nations in the region very soon, combined with what appears to be a renewed focus from the White House with the appointment of General John Kelly Along with the leadership of this Congress, I believe there's ample opportunities to increase our engagement throughout the Americas. Capitalizing on these opportunities, however, is going to require a strategic approach that's informed by our partners in the Latin America and Caribbean area. Through my work, I primarily focus on national security issues, but I spend a lot of time on the ground. I travel to the region, probably more than I want, but I spend a lot of time dealing with different actors and different partners that are express different challenges that they're experiencing in their respective countries. With that, I can say that any regional strategy must take into account the growing transnational threats that are active in both Central, South America, and the Caribbean, along with the regional and extra-regional actors that are exacerbating these challenges, many of which are identified in my written testimony. In my written remarks, I provide a series of recommendations, 5 recommendations in particular, that I believe are areas where the Congress and the new administration can collaborate on to further U.S. interests in the hemisphere. I'd like to highlight 3 of them. The first is immigration security. Border security begins beyond the border. There's a series of networks that are permeating all throughout Latin America, from the southern tip of Argentina all the way up north through Mexico, passing through countries like Venezuela and Central America. The ability to capitalize on our immigration security is encompassed in our ability to strengthen our human intelligence collection. It's no longer suffice to simply rely on law enforcement or immigration officials to wait till they get to the border or to the airport to be able to identify what is the threat. We must be able to augment our embassies and consulates abroad, who are literally our first line of defense when it comes to immigration security, and I believe with the prioritization of the administration on this issue, this provides a tremendous opportunity for the Congress to collaborate on this in Latin America. The second is counterterrorism. We are, in about less than a month, we are about to embark upon a historic legal precedent in Latin America, both in Brazil and in Peru. For the first time in the region, there's a strong potential that we will have the first conviction of a member of an Islamic terrorist organization, both a Sunni Salafist organization and that of ISIS, as well as a Shia extremist organization and that of Hezbollah. The case in Peru is set to be adjudicated before the end of March. The case in Brazil of 12 sympathizers of ISIS that plotted to blow up several sites before the Summer Olympics this past year is set to adjudicate even sooner. If these cases are convicted and sentenced, this is the first time in Latin America's history that a member of an Islamic terrorist organization is convicted for being a member of an Islamic terrorist organization. That creates a legal precedent, because in Latin America, there is a legal vacuum in that about half the countries have anti-terrorism legislation, but even the countries that have this legislation, they never took into account foreign terrorist organizations. It was mostly domestic terrorism threats that they were dealing with when they addressed this problem. The influx of foreign terrorist organizations into the region creates a different challenge for these countries, and being able to convict these individuals are de facto designations. I believe that will create a tremendous opportunity for the United States to cooperate with these countries to provide technical assistance, legal assistance, and other, so that they can create a bigger, robust global counterterrorism coalition. The final recommendation is not the final recommendation in my written remarks, but the one I'd like to address in my opening statement is looking at a particular phenomenon in Latin America that goes beyond corruption. Many countries in Latin America are facing informal markets, illicit markets that override a lot of times the formal markets. Free enterprise oftentimes being overrun by criminal enterprise. However, there's a select few countries that have gone beyond that to essentially use criminalization as a way to empower state policy and to project their influence both within their country and abroad. A colleague of mine, regional security expert Douglas Farah, has called these countries criminalized states. I believe that's a concept that we need to develop and we need to discuss. Are countries using transnational organized crime, terrorism, and proliferation of illicit products as a method to empower their governments, control their people, and eventually promote their influence regionally? I believe if we can assess that and determine that, we need to establish a strategy to deter it and neutralize it, because that can essentially become a bigger threat if you combine it with the component of extra-regional actors. With that, I will just conclude by saying that, I agree with your assessment, Mr. Chairman, that Latin America is largely a zone of peace, if you want to call it that. My colleagues in the defense community often tell me that while we have headaches in Latin America, we have migraines in the Middle East. But what I'd like to couch the committee to think about is that those headaches can turn into migraines if we don't anticipate the problems that are coming our way. War is nothing more than compulsion, and there are many ways to compel your adversaries. And I believe in Latin America, we are in an asymmetric war for legitimacy in the region, and we have not yet begun to fight. In my written testimony, I've identified these recommendations of how to advance on these interests, but it has to be couched among the concept that if we lose in our own hemisphere, we're going to lose everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humeyer. Now, Chair will recognize Jose Cardenas.
Member Cedis, distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is both an honor and a privilege to appear before you today to discuss U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere. As my colleague Joseph Umide mentioned, after more than a decade after the rise of populist governments in the region uninterested in productive relations with the United States, the political pendulum has begun to swing the other way, with the election of a number of pragmatic governments open to reestablishing normal relations. This creates significant opportunities to pursue new initiatives for the benefit of our and our neighbors' security and prosperity. To begin with, I suggest that the new administration and the new Congress focus on 4 issues out of the gate: Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, and Central America, plus 2 longer-term plays, if you will. Mr. Chairman, the U.S.-Mexico relationship is one of the most important bilateral relationships the United States has in the world. It is equally true that President Trump has a mandate to make border security and reviewing NAFTA priorities. These, however, should be carried out in a collaborative way that encourages vital cooperation. It doesn't have to be confrontational. Smoothing over some of the rough edges from the 2016 campaign is key to wider progress in the Americas without compromising on core U.S. interests. Such an approach will likely deliver the stronger border security and a modern NAFTA that better serves U.S. interests. Secondly, on Venezuela, President Trump will encounter a different hemisphere, which creates opportunities for more diplomatic engagement to hold Venezuela accountable for its anti-democratic behavior. The President has already demonstrated an interest in defending democracy by meeting with the wives of 2 high-profile political prisoners, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. President Trump has also sanctioned senior Venezuelan officials implicated in narcotics trafficking in the United States. This 2-track approach of working multilaterally, specifically through the Organization of American States, while increasing pressure by continuing to expose the crimes of Venezuelan officials, would be a welcome change to U.S. policy. On Cuba, Mr. Chairman, the Trump administration should seize the opportunity to bring energy and creativity to truly empowering the Cuban people to decide their own destiny, which President Obama articulated as the goal of his policy. First off, however, we need to immediately reestablish common cause with Cuba's persecuted dissidents and human rights activists. Secondly, the administration should review all executive orders and commercial deals signed under the previous administration and judge them by a single standard. Do they help the Cuban people, or do they empower the Castro regime? I suggest that any activity found to be more sustaining of the regime's control rather than directly benefiting the Cuban people should be ended. On Central America, President Trump can bring new commitment and funding for our beleaguered neighbors attempting to cope with the transnational crime and gang activity. To that end, Mr. Chairman, we have to be guided by several assumptions. Number one, in Central America, as we try to placate and stabilize these societies, preventing the push factor from sending people to our borders, we have to recognize there are no silver bullets. It's not a question of the hard side or the soft side. It's going to take all sides. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, we cannot want it more than they do. We can only help if they are truly committed to helping themselves. And that means tackling the twin evils of corruption and impunity. 3, we must be clear on sequencing. Security doesn't follow from resolving social and economic problems. You have to create security first before anything else. And lastly, a strong commitment to human rights is not a hindrance, it is essential. It creates legitimacy and trust among the very people we are trying to help. Beyond those imperatives, the longer-term play is realigning U.S. relations with 2 of the most important countries in the Western Hemisphere, Brazil and Argentina. Both are undergoing profound course corrections, and we need to take advantage of the situation. Both of those countries can be essential partners after many years of less than cordial relations in support of consolidating democratic and free market development in the region, enhancing both U.S. security and prosperity. The table is set. All it requires is political will. Mr. Chairman, despite the myriad challenges, I remain optimistic on U.S. relations with with Latin America and the Caribbean in the next 4 years. It will not be all smooth sailing. It never is. But the key is to move past the 2016 presidential campaign by pursuing serious initiatives with tangible benefits to both the United States and those who want to work with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the chair will recognize Mr. Quilter for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Sears, for the opportunity to testify today. Good to see you, Mr. Meeks. I will summarize my statement. I ask that the full statement be made part of the record. I'd like to concentrate on 3 different issues which I think are intimately connected: Mexico, Venezuela, and the Organization of American States. Mexico, what we've seen in the past week, the takeaway from what we've seen in the past week is that the dynamic that we are now seeing between Mexico and the U.S. is not business as usual. In 30 years of looking at this relationship, I have never seen it this messy. The Tillerson-Kelly visit, which was intended to smooth things over, I think, in fact, laid bare that 1 year away from Mexican elections, we have a lot on the table between us, Mexico and the United States. We have a big agenda, but the maneuvering room is constricting. It's getting smaller rather than widening. That's not good. What can be lost? A lot. I'm not going to talk about the trade issue because we know that between Canada and Mexico, the trade relationship is huge. I'm going to talk about security, drugs, and migration. What if Mexico were to look the other way on Central American migration going north? What would it look like if Mexico loosened its resolve on the drugs issue with us? What would it look like if Mexico stopped cooperating on terrorism intel with us? Now, I'm talking about Middle Eastern countries. Lots of intel, but I'm talking specifically about that. Number 2, there is a winner out of the past couple of weeks, and that's López Obrador, the perennial leftist presidential candidate in Mexico. His stock is going through the roof. He is a year away from the election, the front runner. This is not the consummation devoutly to be wished for the United States. Number 3, this dynamic we're seeing right now with Mexico is the canary in the coal mine for our relationship with the rest of the hemisphere. We need to fix this because we have serious problems in the region. Case in point, Venezuela. Venezuela remains the ulcerating sore of the region. In my statement, I talk about 2 scenarios: a soft landing, where Maduro basically limps his way to elections next year, which may or may not occur. He's good at buying time. That could happen. The second one is a hard landing. Hard landing will certainly involve bloodshed, will involve the Venezuelan military, will be a security nightmare for Venezuelans' neighbors, and will very likely unleash a refugee crisis. What to do? We need both these things. We need Venezuelans to lead the solution, and we need the international community to accompany. Maduro does care about his international reputation. He doesn't care so much about what the U.S. says, but he cares very much about what happens in the rest of the international community. We got to go there. Sanctions on individuals, such as we just had with the vice president, work. They work. We should do more of those. What not to do? Bristly rhetoric. We've tried that before. Didn't work. We're not doing it now, but we shouldn't do it. Second, and most critically, the U.S. can't do Venezuela alone, and it can't lead on Venezuela. The lesson now from the Mexican dynamic is that U.S. needs partners. Unfortunately, trust in our partnerships is eroding. Maduro is exploiting that erosion. We need tools to galvanize those partnerships. The main one we have is the Organization of American States, the OAS. Let me quickly move to the OAS. The OAS is very weak. It's actually close to a breaking point. This is not an accident. This is a campaign that Venezuela and its friends have waged since Chavez. Unfortunately, I think the U.S. has let this happen. It has allowed a foreign policy asset to weaken that now we need more than ever. The good news is the OAS is worth saving. The time to fix it is now. Latin America in the past 15 years has been a good news story. It's less poor and more middle class than it has been. 2017 and 2018, we will have 8 different presidential elections. This dynamic with Mexico bodes ill. The regional problems such as Venezuela require concerted effort, which now looks more difficult than ever, and the tools to do it, such as the OAS, are in trouble. There are significant U.S. policy equities that hang in the balance without a serious course correction from the Trump administration. I hope it comes in time. Thank you, sir.
I want to thank the witnesses, and I'm pleased that there are several regional ambassadors in attendance today. If you're an ambassador from a Latin American country, if you could raise your hand and be recognized. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for attending. So I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and then we'll go through the order between majority and minority side. And so I'll put the same clock on me as I did you guys, but I may not adhere as strongly to it as I did you. Ms. Yearwood, since Congress passed the Caribbean strategy legislation late last year and given our continued focus on the best way forward in dealing with the thorny issues of corruption, lawlessness, and migration of the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, what do you see as the best strategies for engagement in the hemisphere? Kind of elaborate on some of your opening statement as well.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit more about 4939. 4939 is kind of a little bit unique insofar as there is no money attached to the bill, but what it does is it creates a vehicle for regional engagement with the United States. And I think, according to some of the other statements from the witnesses, the need for having this engagement, particularly, as I mentioned, 22 of the 35 countries, independent nations in the region are in the Caribbean and Central America. Having the ability to dialogue with them and taking advantage of 4939 to create stakeholder dialogue where the U.S. is a partner with the region on these critical issues of corruption, economic development, diplomatic engagement, energy, being able to help pull away the influence of Petrocaribe, which I think is going to be important going forward, and finding ways for the region to advance as self-reliant and self-sustaining nations is going to be important. So I think having vehicles both within the Caribbean and within Central America where the U.S. is engaging productively will be an excellent way to make that vehicle work with the region.
Thank you. I'll shift gears a little bit, Mr. Humeyer. I know you're an expert on security in the region, and you've written extensively on the Iranian activity in the hemisphere. I've been engaged in that since I came. A story broke this week in the Argentine press that exposed some of the tape recordings of Argentine prosecutor Alberto Nisman before his death, where he seemed sure of the guilt of former Foreign Minister Timmerman and other top government officials in covering up the AMIA bombing, and is quoted as saying, quote, "Although they want to kill me and take me out of the picture, that won't be a setback. Many/some of the involved already know and are pleading for their lives, but all of them know what they did, what they said, and it is their problem." So that was the words of Alberto Nisman. Can you expand on this revelation and give us a sense of the status of the investigation into his death and also what he was working on with regard to AMIA?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In Argentina, related to the case of Alberto Nisman, there's actually 3 separate cases that are connected. There's obviously the case of the Amia bombing from 1994 that's still active. It's still around. It needs to be pursued and advanced. There's the case that he presented, that Alberto Nisman presented before the Argentine courts about the criminal conspiracy between the former president, Cristina Kirchner, and her complicitness with the Iranian government to grant impunity to those accused of the Amia bombing. And finally, there is the case on his death. Those three cases are currently active in the Argentine judiciary, and I believe the most important case of the three is the middle one. The case that he presented before the court a week before his death to say that the Argentine government was colluding with the Iranian government to grant impunity. That case was all but thrown out of the courtroom in Argentina repeatedly. It went through various appeal processes, and we have a opportune moment in that some of the obstacles, the judicial obstacles that were presented in that case, have been removed. So that case is now active. The Daya, the Jewish community, the sister of the Amia, has become a part of that case, and so they can now present additional evidence. I actually participated in examining a lot of the evidence that was involved in that case, the wiretaps that Nisman had presented as part of the evidence of making that accusation, and there's a lot more than what he was able to present. Obviously, he was never able to present that because he was killed. Having that case open suggests that he was killed in the line of duty, that he was actively pursuing a judicial matter and then was found dead in his apartment shortly after. The case on his death is also an opportune moment because now it's been graduated to a federal court because of the preceding actions on the other case. This presents a tremendous opportunity and advancement on the Macri administration to be able to help and lend support as needed and as requested to be able to come to a conclusion on either one of those two cases. Having a conclusive judicial action on either one of those two cases could help us advance the AMIA. And at the end of the day, that's what Alberto Nisman was trying to do. He was trying to seek closure for the victims of the AMIA attack and to pursue those that he believed that were behind that attack. I think that there's advancements on that. I think there's a lot of opportunities for the U.S. to help, but it's still in process.
Do you have any sort of timeline idea of when they may come to some conclusion on that?
I would like to say that it would happen this year. I couldn't say that with any certainty, Mr. Chairman, but what I will say is that if there's a time to advance the case, it is now. Last year, obviously Macri was his first year as president. There was a lot of struggles and challenges to get one of those cases open and to get the other case moved to the federal court. That was a very difficult obstacle. They've overcome those obstacles, so now is the time to lend whatever support, whatever assistance is needed so that they can adjudicate these properly. There's still a lot of adversarial forces in the country that don't want to see these cases ever see the light of day, which is why you're seeing those wiretaps come and be leaked.
But in your opinion, is the Macri government being very accommodating and with the prosecutor?
I believe that the Macri administration is supportive to these cases. However, I believe there's more that could be done. I believe that if the U.S. government
President Macri, I would say he campaigned on it, but it was part of his promise to get to the
Correct.
bottom of it, from what I understood.
Correct, but I believe on the change of the administrations in the U.S., I think in the past, he might not have got a clear signal from the U.S. that they were very cooperative on this particular issue. It's not an issue that the U.S. would say that we were involved or had any stake in seeing the outcome or the resolution. That might change, and if that were to change, I think you would see a much more rapid advancement, and the Macri administration would would welcome that change.
Thank you. We went a little further into that than I anticipated. Let me just finish up with Mr. Cardenas. You know, your role with the Bush administration, you've had a lot of experience. What are some of the other diplomatic tools other than the sanctions that we just recently saw the Trump administration? What are the other diplomatic tools you might recommend that the Trump administration use toward Venezuela?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that we need to take a good look at the energy relationship, and that is, of course, Venezuelan oil shipments to the United States. I think that what I'm talking about, of course, is really an expansion of targeted sanctions. Nobody is arguing for the type of wide application of economic sanctions that would only make the lives of individual Venezuelans even worse. But I think that within the realm of authorities that both Treasury and State Department have, that we can do a lot more in terms of sending signals and creating disarray within the leadership of the Venezuelan government. I can't imagine who wants to be the last Venezuelan sanctioned by the United States on behalf of a government that most Venezuelans have long ago lost any faith in. I think that the diplomatic route is key, as my colleague Mr. Quilter stated, within the Organization of American States. I think that the changed environment in the region presents some opportunities that didn't exist before for other countries to get active on the Venezuela issue within the context of the OAS. Of course, we have a very spirited Secretary General, Luis Almagro, who is looking for diplomatic support. We, of course, as the United States, don't want to be out there bear hugging him with love, but we can, through our offices, our good offices around the region and here in Washington, work with these other governments to support Mr. Almagro in what he wants to accomplish on Venezuela. So I guess the most fruitful avenues, I believe, that exist out there are continuing on the diplomatic, regional approach, multilateral approach, and then let's start looking at very specifically at pressure points in the Venezuelan government's economic wherewithal to start upping the pressure. Pressure combined with the multilateral diplomacy, I believe, is the way to go. And frankly, we just did not see that for many years, including both administrations.
I appreciate your frankness, and I hope our subcommittee will bear with me, because I am going to make Venezuela a focus of this subcommittee on what we can do for the people of Venezuela and in the oppression. And so we will have multiple hearings, I'm sure, in this Congress on this. With that, I'll yield to the gentleman, the ranking member, Ms. Sears, for as much time as he wants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a newspaper report out today that the new budget looks to cut 37% of the State Department's budget. This is it just came out. I was just wondering what you think the impact is going to do with our relation to the region if this were to become fruition.
Thank you, Mr. Series. I think Mr. Humere said it very well in terms of working with the State Department and U.S. agencies in country goes a long way towards helping identify and deal with threats as they occur. And I think State Department is the front lines in the region when it comes to dealing with problems, when it comes to nurturing the relationships. I think taking the State Department out of the equation creates a void. It means that other countries are able to step in and nurture relationships that the U.S. should be leading on. And so I would strongly advocate against it.
Yes, Mr. Series, I believe obviously you'll have a detrimental effect, and any cuts, any budget cuts in a particular part of the world where the U.S. government, particularly U.S. State Department, still struggles to have the level of engagement that I think they would wish to have, it will hurt. But I think I lived also through the cuts in the Defense Department during the sequester that obviously then General John Kelly, Commander of Southcom, obviously complained a lot about because he didn't feel like he had the adequate resources to go after the threats. But I think both of these cuts, there's a reality, a fiscal reality that as legislators you know very well. However, it's also a consequence of priorities or lack of priorities. And this is a point I just want to emphasize. A lot of challenges we're addressing throughout the world are converging in Latin America, be it the aggressions or resurgence of Russia, the expansions and aggression of China, or the belligerence of Iran. Those challenges are becoming more closer to our shores in Latin America, in places like Venezuela. And if our policymakers don't prioritize the region, that's going to become a bigger problem. That's going to become a bigger threat. Dealing with that requires money. It requires appropriations. It requires us to give our authorities the capabilities that they need to address it.
Mr. Cardenas?
Thank you, Mr. Cetus. As Chairman Mr. Duncan noted, I did serve in the Bush 43 administration, and both at State Department and USAID. So I've been in the belly of the beast, and I recall it was very, very shocking or certainly sobering to compare the resources that we had at our disposal with those that our colleagues in DoD had at their disposal. So that was it was an ongoing challenge. But at the same time, there is waste, fraud, and abuse in any federal bureaucracy that can be addressed, that more efficiency and a better prioritization of objectives can be achieved. I think it has to be an effort. I think whereby one has to be cognizant of a new environment whereby we have to be leaner and meaner. Maybe it will not wind up where the president's opening bid established, and the figure could result in a higher number, but I think that the bureaucracies involved need to be prepared for to participate in leaner, meaner operations.
Mr. Coulter?
The American people apparently believe that 25% of our budget goes to foreign aid. The number is less than 1%, as you know. I think this would be penny wise and pound foolish. Any cuts to the 150 account would be more expensive in the long run. General Mattis himself said that if you don't fully fund the State Department, I think he said, I have to buy more ammunition. And I think that's absolutely right. And buying ammunition is much more expensive than fully funding the State Department. Thank you.
And my topic that I always raise, partners in the region long maligned the United States for its treatment of Cuba and used it as an excuse to stay silent. Now that we have this opening and we have all this counter back and forth, what is the principal reason that these countries don't speak up about the abuses in Cuba? I mean, it's well documented, human rights abuses, people getting beat up. Why is it that they don't speak up? I mean, they don't have to now worry about us. Mr. Cardenas?
Mr. Cetus, I have, as a longtime student of U.S.-Cuba relations, I do have some impressions, if I could share with you. I think that in most cases, in many of these countries, they are afraid domestically of their own left. The left in Latin America is not like the left in this country. The left movements, many have been widely infiltrated by Cuba, can be violent, they can be disruptive, and to push against Cuba, to speak out for the most humane topics that any American wouldn't think twice about, they remain reluctant for fear of the trouble that Cuba can cause in their own countries.
Mr. Rivera, would you agree with that?
I do agree. Let me just add to that. It's also not an accident that you're seeing this in particular countries, because what the Cubans are very good at is working with host governments to be able to influence public opinion. And it's that center of gravity, public opinion, that we need to tackle to be able to get it more on the side of U.S. influence or U.S. activity. In my written testimony, I examined public opinion polls through Latino Barometer, a respected Chilean polling firm, and what you see is a negative trend in favorable U.S. public opinion in 10 countries throughout the hemisphere. Now, I'm not going to say that Cubans are behind all of that, but they're definitely pushing that narrative. It's the ability to get a narrative, to grab a narrative that helps solidify our ability to sell the U.S. as a legitimate partner in the region. We don't have that narrative. The U.S. does a lot of good actions. The Defense Department does a lot of good. Whenever there's a humanitarian crisis, they're one of the first people to respond. But that action isn't accompanied by a story. And it's those stories that need to be told to be able to push back against what the Cubans have done throughout the region.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. Now, going back and forth, we're going to go to Mr. Rooney from Florida for 5 minutes.
This testimony has been a very thorough overview of what's going on in Latin America right now, and I appreciate it. I've spent a fair bit of time down there myself over the years. So I'm trying to find a couple of things that haven't been mentioned yet to be productive. So, Mr. Humire, if you could comment, the chairman commented on the role of Iran in the Naismith case in Argentina. If you could comment on the current activities of Iran in Venezuela and Nicaragua.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Iran, let me just start by saying that Iran, along with their proxy Hezbollah, is present in every country in Latin America. In some cases, they're more subterranean. They're working out of an informal network. And in other cases, such as Venezuela, they have a full seat at the table with the current government. The recent appointment of the current Venezuelan Vice President, Tarek El-Assami, to me was a clear indicator of the level of control and influence that Iran has in that country. I've studied the Iranian presence in Venezuela for several years, and it's graduated. It started as a cultural presence, moved over to become a diplomatic presence with more economic engagement. It's now fully graduated into a military presence. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards, along with their subordinate elements through the Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces Logistics, has complete presence and activities within Venezuela, including territories that are not within control of the Venezuelan government. Tarek El-Assami was one of the individuals that controlled a lot of that network, or at least was one of the man on the ground partners for Tehran in that activity. My understanding is that as the executive vice president, he's been granted executive powers that are essentially presidential powers that can be used by Iran to foment more instability and conflict. What I worry about with Venezuela, and think of it within the context of Syria, what are we dealing with Syria? We're dealing with a proxy conflict with many parties where the Iranians, the Russians, and other actors are essentially fomenting instability and violence so that they can engage the United States. If you take that lens, that optic, and you apply that to Venezuela, you have the same actors, obviously not to the level that you see them in Syria, but the potential for that is there, especially with an individual like Tarek El-Assami at the helm. His connections with Damascus, with Russia, with Tehran, could potentially create a conflict where the military gets into a war with the militias, and that only benefits the folks in the Middle East.
I'm glad you brought up about that, because we know how often they fly in and out of there, what kind of aircraft they use. Similar to that, assuming that we don't get into a Cold War Guatemala situation, that Venezuela finally, we're in the final innings of an opportunity to put the 15 years of the Chavez-Maduro behind us. Could you comment on what the impact of the smaller Caribbean countries is going to be with the end of Petrocaribe? I don't know who would be the best for that. Maybe Ms. Yearwood would, because she's the Central American expert.
Well, I mean, Venezuela, because of everything that's going on in Venezuela, obviously Petrocaribe, the influence of Petrocaribe is waning. And what we are seeing is the push towards greater energy diversity and sustainability in the region. The U.S. is engaging in various programs throughout the Caribbean and Central America. And basically, the hope is that Petrocaribe will become not as influential at the end of the day. And I think, given everything that's going on in Venezuela, we can expect to see the Petrocaribe program come to an end at some point in the not too distant future. From a Caribbean perspective, well, the countries that are a part of the Petrocaribe program, the important thing is that they're ready to deal with the move away from Petrocaribe, which I think opens a lot of opportunities for collaboration with the United States. And I referenced earlier the discovery of oil in Guyana and the cooperation between Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago in terms of exploiting that opportunity. So.
Time for one more, Chairman. One brief one. I'd like to ask Mr. Quilter and perhaps Mr. Cardenas about the Pacific Alliance. That's one thing that hadn't been mentioned here. And we've got 4 very important countries working together and looking west. Well, we don't know sometimes where we're looking right now. And you both touched on some of those. So maybe you could give us some comment on the negative aspects of that for the United States and the positive aspects of that for Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru vis-a-vis China and Asia.
The Pacific Alliance is an amazingly effective integration mechanism. Right now, trade is a bad word. We're sort of falling over ourselves trying to understand how it fits into our bigger picture. But that is precisely the kind of integration mechanism that we would need to work with. We need to work with it in some manner. The fact that the TPP is now off the table means that we need a new way to engage with that group, because they're going to move without us. There's no doubt that they're going to move without us. And another thing we have to think about are opportunity costs of all these things. So are we creating a strategic opportunity for China as we step back from these relationships? The same question really applies to Russia, although not as urgently, I believe. Another opportunity cost, which was mentioned by the chairman, which I'd like to flag, is what we really should be talking about right now with Mexico is energy integration in this region. We can do it. That is the next item on the agenda. We're just not getting to that item because we're talking about a bunch of other things that I think we should have left behind.
Ambassador Rooney, if I could just add to Peter's comments. The Pacific Alliance is something that was an achievement of U.S. foreign policy as an objective of policy that has spanned Democratic and Republican administrations. That is advocating on behalf of trade integration, open economies, free trade, and now that we have this entity that is born of itself, it wasn't like the United States came and put them together. They unilaterally came together, but it was after many years of things that we had pushed for, bipartisan support in the region. So I think that we have to quickly figure out what our approach is going to be. President Trump has been very clear on his points about multilateral agreements, but he is for bilateral agreements, so we have to figure out how this all fits together.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman. I hope, 5 weeks into this, I hope energy is a part of the conversation as NAFTA is renegotiated. We do know with natural gas pipelines, with constitutional changes in Mexico with regard to nationalization, denationalization of energy sector, there's a lot of opportunity with Mexico that I think ought to be on the table. And I can promise you I will be conversing with the Trump administration on energy policy with regard to Western Hemisphere countries, because I think I used to talk about American energy independence. I broadened that to North American energy independence. Now I've broadened that to hemispheric energy independence, where we can work with our allies here that are hungry for energy, hungry for American technology. There's just a heck of a lot of opportunity here, bilateral opportunity in so many ways. So with that, I'll go to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, and for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States Summit on January 25th, President Castro expressed Cuba's willingness to continue negotiating a bilateral agreement with the U.S. President Trump has continually repeated his America First mantra about creating jobs and increasing exports. Lifting the embargo would open up a new market for American companies and the potential to add $366 million annually in U.S. exports. In Illinois alone, where I represent, the removal of U.S. travel and financial restrictions would increase Illinois agricultural exports to Cuba by $6.6 million annually. In my opinion, expanding trade opportunities for American farmers is putting America first. Given the economic benefits and regional support for lifting the outdated Cuban embargo, what are the next steps that Congress and the Trump administration should consider? And also, how should we balance trying to bring opportunity to the Cuban people without emboldening the Castro regime? And if we could start with Mr. Cardenas and Mr. Quilter.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I would say that that opportunities, unfortunately, what I have seen over the last 2 years is the Cuban government taking advantage of the very generous outreach of the Obama administration to put the past history behind us and to move forward in a cooperative manner for the benefit of the Cuban people has resulted in the Castro regime manipulating and using those overtures to solidify its own control over the people. And specifically, I would say that the Cuban military takeover of the Cuban tourism industry, the hotels, the restaurants, and other institutions means that this has translated into a windfall, financial windfall for the government at the expense of the people. I have seen very little true market openings whereby Cubans truly have the freedom to open businesses, to conduct them as they see fit, without fear of the government deciding that they're making too much money. So I would find ways to review the relationship with more stipulations, more conditionality on benefits for the Cuban people, rather than simply this open-ended new path that was opened up by President Obama that doesn't account or doesn't demand or expect any reciprocal action from the Cuban government.
I would agree that a metric here is benefit to the Cuban people. I think that's absolutely correct. I don't think lifting the embargo is on the table. I don't think there are votes for it right now. I do not believe we need to go any farther than what President Obama has done for now. My take on the changes that President Obama made are a little bit different, and I see them as things that adhere to us as Americans, and that's a part of it that sometimes gets lost in the discussion. It's not only a foreign policy move to give Americans back their rights to travel, to engage in commerce, to help their families in Cuba if they have them, et cetera. So, but all through this, we must keep our compass true. This is about democracy. This is about human rights. It's about fugitives from justice, as Mr. Sears knows well, something very close to his heart. That should still be the north of our relationship with Cuba. That should not change.
Gentlelady's time's expired. I'm gonna go ahead to Ms. Torres, and I'm gonna ask if you could just limit to maybe one good question, because they've called votes, and then I'll move it on to your colleague, and just allow the new members to ask. Go ahead, Ms. Torres.
Great, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate. It's been quite interesting hearing all of the different perspectives. I'm new to the Western Hemisphere Committee, new to Foreign Affairs Committee, but the work in certainly the Northern Triangle is not new to me. Been very, very involved in addressing the issues, specifically the issues of government corruption and ensuring that the U.S. is not just throwing good money after, good money. It's all our taxpayers' dollars, but ensuring that once our work there is done, we leave a government, that with a judicial process that actually works for the people. My goal is that the next Norma Torres will have an opportunity to be a member of Congress in Guatemala and not have to be sent to live with a relative in the U.S. because it was too dangerous for her to grow up there. On the issue of Mexico, I'm from California. Mexico is our #1 trading partner. Mr. Quilter, I really appreciate your comments. Diplomatic engagement, I absolutely agree, is the key to solving some of our problems. A lot of the problems have been created with this new administration. I believe, in my opinion, some of the very loose comments that have been stated by this administration has certainly hurt us there. We don't have an ambassador to help clean up some of the mess that we have created there, and that poses a problem, not just to all of the states that trade, with Mexico. On the issue of weapons, I'm curious to know as to what policies could be effective to help stem the tide of guns across the border into Mexico. I have to go back to some of the comments that I think it was your comment that stated that Mexico has fortified their borders, and even within Central America, they used to have a sort of a brotherhood. There were no borders. People from the region can travel across. That is no longer, what is happening there. People are stopped. 97% of the migrants that cross to the Mexico border are sent right back to their home countries without refusing them refugee status. So what more can we do to ensure that we don't destabilize Mexico as we have done in some of the other areas where we have no business conducting ourselves the way we have been in the past?
Very quickly, thank you very much for your letter of February 27th on Mexico. I think it's a wonderful letter, and it was great to see it. On guns, lost a little bit in the trip right now of Secretary Tillerson was that he brought up the issue of guns and bulk cash, which is, of course, what the Mexicans want out of the other side of the drug equation, just that specific item. This has been on the table for a long time. We've just never really gone there. We need a strategy. We have the smarts to do it. We have state, we have ICE, we have ATF, and we have ONDCP, which is really good on the numbers. We need to engage them all on that. To do it, we need better information. We need better reporting. We need better transparency about the guns. We need a very good record of what guns are eventually found down in Mexico, and where did they end up, where they recovered, and what for. Those are the kinds of things we need.
70% of those weapons found in Mexico are, have a U.S. Point of origin.
Yes, and we need to make sure our numbers are really good, because we have these discussions about whether it's really 70% or some number that's smaller. Honestly, it doesn't matter. These numbers are way too big.
Data is not.
So we need, but we need good numbers.
On the issue of Central America, congratulations, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I think you have been around for a while, and the work that you've done with Plan Colombia has been wonderful. But what lessons learned from Plan Colombia can we apply to the Northern Triangle? I truly believe that we've sort of done such a great job in Colombia that a lot of the drug cartels have moved north to the region and are the cause, part of the cause of what has happened in the Northern Triangle specifically.
I would just very quickly think that say that the essential lesson is political leadership in the region. We have to find, frankly, 3 or 4 President Uribes among the Northern Triangle countries. Somebody who is willing to go against vested interests. As you noted, Congresswoman, the narcos and the gangs have so permeated these societies that you don't know who's dirty and who's clean. But you can find out, and there are ways to find out. We need to help them expose the insidious infiltration of the narco traffickers, and they need to be rounded up, and we need to, as I briefly stated in my testimony, the twin evils of corruption and impunity. We need to push and stand behind and help those administrations counter those evils within those societies in order to make real progress against the narco
I
traffickers.
agree with that. I disagree that security should be our only point of business there. I also believe that ensuring that we are supportive of CSIG or MOXIE continues to be a priority for us, and ensuring that educational opportunities for the future leaders of these countries, that there is an investment outside of military training or police training in the region.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just really quickly
Quickly,
address, just, Congresswoman, just to encapsulate Central America so you understand, to deal with the insecurity situation there, and I deal a lot with the Department of Defense on countering transnational organized crime, there has to be an economic solution as well. The idea of doing security measures without doing any type of economic empowerment or any economic trade is not going to work. If you look at the crisis in Salvador, if you overlay, just a small anecdote, if you overlay where all the gangs have become greater control over different territories in El Salvador, and you overlay that where they have lack of property rights, it's the same territories. So essentially what I'm saying is that we have to understand what are the drivers of economic growth, and if you look at the drivers of economic growth, they're mostly economic freedom. And I think that's where we have to go.
I hate to do it. There's less than 5 minutes on the clock for votes that they've called. Members of the committee can submit questions for the record. We'd ask that you respond to those so that members can have their question asked. I apologize, I don't have the vote schedule, but I want to appreciate the participation. And Mr. Espaillat, I will make it up to you in a future committee hearing. Before we adjourn, I want to give a special thanks to James Rendaccio, our current Western Hemisphere Subcommittee intern. James has been a real asset to the subcommittee. We've been happy to have his significant contributions to our team. We've got a great staff on the minority and majority side. Look forward to working with you. Thank the witnesses, and with that, we'll stand adjourned.